it introduces people to choice. And I think just like how Firefox drew people away from Internet Explorer and then subsequently onto other browsers because they saw that there was an alternative to be had outside of their comfort zone, which was Internet Explorer. I think the same goes for Ubuntu, for Apple, and all these other choices that people have on the desktop. And I think introducing them to just the idea of choice and change and something different is all that's needed to kickstart people looking in the future about other alternatives. So I don't see it as a bad thing. Sorry, that's my view. Yeah,
it just reminds me of, I think Stallman's argument against the calling of the platform Linux, and I probably made the, probably can be accused of just calling it Linux in this show for really just for convenience in this case, because it's shorter to say Linux. One of the things he talks about is how the platform is a bit of a kind of a Trojan horse to freedom, so enterprises will adopt the GNU system and then try to learn about the philosophy of sharing and try to do things like the things that they learned from and came to use. And one of the things he said was, people do not understand freedom and do not understand why they should reject proprietary software because they call it Linux and because they don't know anything about the GNU system. And lots of them think that the Linux platform was created in some dorm by some guy from Finland. And that kind of hurts him because he actually started the whole movement about 10 years earlier with the kernel. And I kind of accept his point of view. And I think that's quite true that people think of Linux as just the whole thing. And they think that they should listen to Torvalds when it comes to guidance on how to use the system and what's true and what's exaggerated and how to deal with politics. And what happens now when you also take this platform, you can say platform called Linux, so the kernel, and you put on top of it lots of proprietary layers, not KDE or GNOME, you put things like WebOS on top of that. They remove any mention of Linux, and then they also encourage developers to create applications with DRM and restrictions and remote deletions. You see lots of this in the app stores in Android. They also construct things with the Dalvik virtual machine, and some people say it's so that they have more control over the platform itself, and also they can control how applications behave, and they can lock people in and require that people pay money for it, and that requires usually that they will be proprietary. And this kind of leads to Android being increasingly just a platform for lots of proprietary software, and not exactly where you want to go with we're not even with Linux, because Linux also opposes DRM to a certain extent. It talks about TiVoization, but they don't actually encourage the putting of all kinds of restrictions to the level where you build a file system to restrict people's access or trying to channel your signal to the screens via the graphics stack by supporting all kinds of specifications that come from Hollywood. So they kind of oppose that, and it's kind of a tricky situation. So what I do think is that increasingly we'll find that Android and Ubuntu and all kinds of platforms will deviate away from Linux. It kind of will be the next generation of platforms, which can be quite proprietary. They don't necessarily adopt the free desktops. They try to create their own desktops, and you will not hear much about the Linux inside them. And that's kind of depressing in some sense, because it shows you how once you get to promote a certain brand, one company kind of hijacks the brands and takes the lead with its own brand and with the code of predecessors.
I think that just shows the diverse range of topics that we all have. I don't know, Gordon, if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, I was just getting a sneeze out the way before I come back in there. Right, yeah, on the Android thing, I think what's not helped on Android is the fact that I was listening to Engadget, and they said there was some criticism about Samsung about including Bing in one of their Android phones for Verizon, I think. And they questioned the Samsung rep at the trade show, and they said, well, why? I mean, who do you make phones for? And he said quite candidly, look, to be honest, mate, we make them for Verizon. Verizon's our customer. or AT&T. The carriers are the customers, and the carriers decide. So basically, the carriers are offering all these variants on Android on their phones. We get that in the UK, where the same phone on O2 might be stuck on Android 1.6 because they're not making any effort to giving you 2.1 or 2.2 or anything like that. So, and well, if you get the same phone on a different carrier, you're already on 2.2. So I think the carriers, how they handle Android makes an awful lot of difference into how people perceive Android. And you can't really blame companies for wanting to distinguish, because on one hand you've got the customer looking at them and going, right, Apple make their own hardware, their own operating system, their own everything is Apple, and then you've got Android, and I can get that same phone on different carriers, different hardware, different things, and it's all Android or Android. So that you can sort of understand, but unfortunately, in a lot of cases, the customer is a sort of a secondary thing. All the customizations are about getting that brand in as many places as they can, like Vodafone or O2 or whatever. Make that branding hard to ignore, hard to remove, and put all these little tweaks in that help the company rather than the user. So all of that affects the user's experience of that platform.
To just point out, Verizon actually gets paid $500 million by Microsoft to put the the Bing toolbar inside all the phones, and to also make it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to change that. This was reported by the Register at first in 2009, and later on we find some verification that this is true. And I wrote like 5 posts about just this one case. And the other thing is Samsung. It's a huge company. It's like half a million employees. That's like, I think 6 times the number of employees of Microsoft. And they make lots of phones at the hardware side, but lots of them get rebadged as something else. And I know the UK carriers tend to buy from Samsung and basically put their own brands on that and call it the 360, or I cannot really think of more examples now. But you will not necessarily know it's a Samsung phone, although it's made there, because it's being rebranded, and you will also not know it's Android. And they try to sell the customization, all kinds of parts of the system, in the same way that the OEMs try to sell you the pre-installed applications and make money on that. You know, they try to subsidize the phone based on all kinds of tweaks and things which take control away from the user. And that's also a serious issue with Android. It allows, when it goes to the carriers, it allows them to take control of the users and decide on behalf of the users. So this also gives ammunition to Apple, which is the main rival now to Android. Microsoft is really out of the picture almost. And what Apple is trying to say is the carriers are in complete control of the phones, and even if the platform is open, you cannot really install it yourself, or you cannot quite control it as much as the carrier can control that. And that's a true issue.
Well, looking at the clock on the screen, it looks like we've done about 1 hour and 45 minutes, if that's correct. Do you agree with that, Roy? Is that what your timer says?
Yeah.
So I think we'll start to wrap this up. And there's just one very quick point which I think will be nice to end on, because of the fact that we've just been talking about mobile phones. And that was this 40,000 figure for Windows Phone 7 sales so far. I don't know if you know the answer to this, Roy. And legitimately, I don't know the answer. This isn't a loaded question. We saw press about 6 months ago, before the phone was released, that every Microsoft employee would get a free Windows 7 phone. Do you know whether this figure that Microsoft is quoting as being the sales figure for Windows 7 phones so far is inclusive of the Microsoft employees that have got one of these phones for nothing? I don't know if you've read it there.
No, I don't think so. And there is one from a deal from Dell, which seemed like a PR kind of move, because I don't really see why Dell would want to move people off I think they used Blackberries before, and they did a kind of a PR move, trying to say, well, I'll put all the employees in Windows Phone 7. I couldn't see any other company that did that. But the 40,000 phones figure, is it just the US? Did they just open it?
It was very ambiguous. I never got an exact answer when I looked, but to be fair, I haven't actually delved quite deep.